Welcome. I'm Dr. Liz, an entrepreneur, speaker, podcaster, mom, and wife. This podcast is about hypnosis, but also about all kinds of ways to help you live your fullest life, to heal, transform, to play the long game and go after the joy. You can see more about me at drlizhypnosis.com. Hop over there to get a free hypnosis file to decrease fear and anxiety, or one to increase emotional stability. They're there just for you. I hope you enjoy the podcast as much as I do. Peace. Hi everyone, Dr. Liz here. Today's interview is with Oren J Sofer. He was actually on the podcast back in 2019, episode 110. So if you go to the website, drlizhypnosis.com/episode 110, you can hear his original interview, which was around his book titled Say What You Mean, A Mindful Approach to Nonviolent Communication. It's an excellent book about how to communicate better. He's published another book now, Your Heart Was Made for This: Contemplative Practices for Meeting a World in Crisis with Courage, Integrity, and Love. And it is a wonderful book. Oren is a meditation teacher in the early Buddhist tradition and a certified trainer in nonviolent communication, as well as a somatic experiencing practitioner for the healing of trauma. He has a wonderful spirit about him, a kind heart, and a very soothing voice. You'll hear me talk some about how my weekend was before this interview. This interview was on a Monday morning. And I honestly almost canceled the interview because I had to handle a medical crisis with my daughter in the very wee hours of the morning, 4 a.m. I was very tired, but I thought, no, I really want to do this interview. We had to reschedule another time. So this was a second attempt. In just doing the interview with him, I found so calming and learned even more than I learned from his beautiful book. We talk about his new book, as well as some life that has happened and some of the concepts in the book applying to what's going on right now in the world. You could use his book like a workbook if you wanted to, which he references at the beginning of the interview, because there are practices to do. So you could read it, do the practices, and perhaps do that with a friend that's interested in doing that with you. I've been doing that about 2 years now with one of my friends in recovery, actually. We schedule the time every week. We pick a workbook to go through. And it's become a really wonderful process that I rely on, actually, for some wisdom in my life, some thoughtfulness, and some time to slow down, as well as some connection with a friend. So I hope that you would have the same positive experience that I have had. Let's jump in to this wonderful interview with Oren J Sofer. Peace. Hi, Oren. Welcome back to the Hypnotize Me podcast.
Hey, Liz. Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. You've had quite a few changes in your life since our last one.
Indeed.
And yes, I really wanted to jump in also to your new book. Before we get started, is it okay if you just lead us in a brief mindfulness grounding exercise? One that would be appropriate for people who are driving if they're listening to this. I don't know if that's like antithetical or not, but
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah. Is that okay?
Absolutely. So
Okay,
just
great.
invite folks to start to become aware of the weight of your body, sitting or standing. If you're walking, just feel the ground beneath you. Maybe take a deep breath. And just focus on the exhalation and any softening or loosening that happens in the body as you exhale. Notice the pull of your attention to other things, to thoughts, to what's happening around you, to some projects or tasks. And see what it's like to keep bringing your attention back to the simplicity of just feeling the weight of your body on the earth. this grounding force, quite literally, that holds us to the planet. And then as you do that, see if you can notice the stability, the steadiness of what's beneath you. Again, whether you're walking, sitting on a bus, a train, in a car. There's this vast, deep, steady presence of the earth that we can tap into. And just notice how that affects your breathing, how it affects your heart or your mind. Can you just let that register inside for a moment and feel supported? And then continuing to attend to whatever's happening around you, noticing if there's any shift in how you feel as you do that. Thanks for joining me.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your new book, Your Heart Was Made for This. Tell me why you wrote it.
I wrote it for a few different reasons. I started writing it in 2020 during that really difficult year we all had with the pandemic, and then the murder of George Floyd and the kind of cultural and spiritual upheaval that brought forth a sort of moral reckoning here in the US, the movement for Black Lives. And then the wildfires out west, which was this kind of wake up call around climate change for many of us. And so, as a meditation teacher, one of the ways that I could contribute was to write about the inner resources we have and how those can be a support to not just kind of get through what was happening, but to actually make the most of it and start to thrive inside. And so that was what started me writing the book. And then, as you kind of alluded to in your intro, my wife and I got pregnant, and we now have a healthy 13-month-old son.
Mm-hmm.
And the prospect of raising a child in the world today, with all that is changing and falling apart, also really brought me face to face with a question that's been present for me really my whole adult life. But what made me want to grapple with it in a deeper way, which is, what is the relevance of our meditation, our contemplative practice, our self-care to working for a better world? And are these two just separate things? Can they and do they support each other? And so I wanted to engage and grapple with those questions in a deeper way.
Mm-hmm.
And the book is sort of my response to that, which is that the two are actually quite intricately connected and need each other to be complete and effective. And I take the reader through the development of 26 positive traits or qualities. The number 26 is half of a year. So if you do 2 weeks for every chapter or quality, you have a whole year of learning and exploration and strengthening the inner foundation from which we live and from which we can be more effective and visionary, really, in our work for building better communities and changing the course of where we're headed as a species and a planet.
Mm-hmm. So how do you see them as related?
So one way to talk about it is to talk about the risks of not having them connected, and I'll start there. So
Okay.
if we just focus on the inner life and wellness, spirituality, self-care, however you want to think about it, we run the risk of abdicating our responsibility as citizens and as moral and ethical human beings to the immense suffering that's unfolding in the world. It can have the often unintended consequence of just kind of reinforcing our felt need for comfort, our sense of isolation and individualism, and view the world as something else out there that we need to escape from to feel okay.
Mhm.
On the other hand, what I see and with many of the activists that I work with and young people I meet who are working for change in the world is that if we don't have some way of nourishing the heart, we burn out.
Mhm.
We burn out. And we can end up working for change from a place of reactivity, from a place of anger, resentment, or even despair, which eats away at us
Mhm.
inside and limits the efficacy of our work. So these two, we strive for these to support each other, and that's really the role that I see
Mm.
is that service, activism, social change work, which takes many, many different forms. It's not just
Mhm.
being in a protest. Parenting can be a form of social change work. Serving in your community, volunteering. These are all ways
Yes.
of expressing our love, our care, our empathy, and our vision, our values in the world. So they give a vehicle for translating our inner life into action in the world. On the flip side, having some kind of relationship with our heart and our inner life, one, it renews us, it provides balance, it helps us to encounter the immense crushing pain in our world without being broken by it. So we have
Mhm.
some resilience inside. And quite crucially, it helps us to align means with ends so that in the things that we are doing that we care about, whether it's serving on the PTA in our town or getting the vote out or other forms of organizing, it allows us to do that in a way where we are living and embodying the values we want to see in the world,
Mm.
which I think is essential for modeling that there's a different way forward for us as a species, given so much of what we're facing from climate to economic uncertainty to war, poverty, hunger. It's difficult times for many of the creatures on the planet, not just the humans.
Mhm.
And I think we need to step up
Yeah.
and model our better side.
It's creating that sense of balance then, because it can feel overwhelming when you think about, I mean, on a larger scale, it can feel overwhelming, but then even on a local scale, when you're volunteering or trying to make change or giving some service or parenting, like you said, can often feel
Absolutely.
overwhelming. So
Yeah.
it's really balancing that. So part of that I hear though is not going into, I think you referenced it when you began speaking about this isolatory self-care, really.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's all about me, which
Yeah.
doesn't feel balanced either. If it just
No.
becomes all about the
Right.
person and not the community they're living in, the family they're living in, the larger world they're living in.
Yeah.
So really going back and forth between the two. Is that correct?
Absolutely well said. And it's one of the themes that I explore and that kind of runs through the book is this theme of balance, because of course there is a time and a place to turn away. There is a time and a place to shut off the news, to turn our
Mhm.
attention just to ourself or our
Mhm.
family or our community,
Mhm.
because we need nourishment, we need rest, we need joy, we need gratitude. These are some of the things that I
Yes.
explore in the book. But that the wider view is that those are part of a whole. The more deeply we connect with gratitude, um, the more we also open to grief for all that we've lost personally
Mhm.
and collectively. And the deeper we connect with our joy, the more acutely we're able to feel sorrow and sadness, and the two are intimately connected. So the balance piece is, as you said, being able to move back and forth between them, to have a place for both in our
Mhm.
hearts. And so the book is really designed to make that practical, to not just have it be an idea, but to provide a little bit of a roadmap for how to do that.
Yes. Also in chapter 4, which is on mindfulness,
Hmm.
I love how you say that it's a way to metabolize our experiences and our emotions. And I think that's what you're referencing here. It's like when we do go out in the world and we're doing service or even thinking about it and trying to make sense of it, trying to um, not let it overwhelm us sometimes, then the mindfulness of being in the present, the really grounding, just like we started the episode, is a way to metabolize some of those
Yeah.
experiences. Yeah, I love how you put that.
Thank
Mhm.
you. Yeah. And that's a different orientation to mindfulness than a lot of what we see in the popular sphere, where mindfulness is just this kind of attentional training to calm down or feel better,
Mhm.
which not only limits its benefit, but actually reinforces some unhealthy negative patterns of avoiding pain and chasing after pleasure. It's like if my mindfulness practice becomes about trying to feel good, trying to feel calm, it's just another drug.
Mm, mhm.
We have to understand that the calm, the peace, the stress reduction that comes from mindfulness is two things. One, it's a step in a larger process. It's the first step of kind of establishing a foundation and a basis to then actually embrace all of our life.
Mhm.
And then the second point is that calm, that ease, that peace inside, it deepens and emerges in a more kind of flexible and true way, not by avoiding the hurt in our hearts, but by learning to be with it, learning to understand it, as you brought back that word I use in the book, to metabolize it. When we discover that we have the inner strength to be with anything, to manage whatever arises, that's when there's a really true kind of calm and ease and peace that arises, because we're no longer trying to control life, but we're actually resting in a kind of dynamic relationship with things as they're changing. And mindfulness
Mm.
is a key ingredient in developing the capacity to do that, to meet whatever arises, which
Mhm.
includes the hardship, the challenge, the fear, the anger, the self-doubt, all of it. There's space for all of
Mm.
it. With mindfulness, we don't become consumed by that stuff. We actually are able to step back from it, feel it as just a natural part of being human, and understand it, which allows it to resolve inside.
Okay, so you're talking about it as a tool to gain perspective. So
Yeah.
it's being present, not just simply to be present, but to gain some perspective around what's going on as well. Which, yeah, isn't often taught in mindfulness. It's like, oh, right
Yeah.
here, you're trying to get away from the
Yeah.
perspective and things. So
Yeah.
I think it did strike me as a unique viewpoint.
Hmm.
And I know in the psychology field, we often talk about mindfulness in terms of feeling what's going on. So it's not
Hmm. Hmm.
necessarily a tool to feel better,
Right.
more of a tool to gain awareness
Yeah.
and some perspective. If
Right.
something's painful,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
yes, it's painful right now.
Right. And
Mhm.
there are those two components that you're highlighting, Liz, which are core to mindfulness. There's the awareness piece of what's unfolding right now, and that's the intimacy with experience, right? That's the actually
Mhm.
feeling it from the inside, which is different from being lost in it, crushed by it, consumed by it, overwhelmed
Yes.
by it.
Yeah.
And then there's the perspective, then there's the balance. And the thing that's really subtle about this is that um, the perspective, the balance piece, isn't a disconnecting. It's it's actually what allows us to be very intimate with what we're feeling without being crushed by it, because we recognize that it's okay, that it's going to
Mhm.
change, that it's natural, it's not my fault. Like all of this
Mm.
understanding that's present with mindfulness
Mhm.
brings us more into a deeper and fuller relationship with life.
Well, I think that leads to chapter 6, the wisdom chapter, which I
Yes.
also appreciated. What you're really
Yeah.
talking about is that is a struggle for people
Yeah.
because you're really talking about acceptance, radical acceptance, which is
Mhm.
originally a Buddhist concept. It's made its way into more of the popular culture, I would say.
Yeah.
But it is that you talk about the Four Noble Truths of the Buddha. There's
Mhm.
suffering, there's cause to the suffering. Suffering can end, and there's a path to that end.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people get caught in the suffering
That's
and
right.
don't see the path. And so the mindfulness piece comes in because it can help someone gain perspective to the path, to
Right.
know, okay, this will end. There is an end to it, which is sometimes hard to grasp in the moment.
It can be. It really can be. That's the trick our mind plays on us, is that whatever we're feeling or thinking or experiencing seems, we become so transfixed, so hypnotized, if I can use that word, by it, that we believe it's going to last forever. And so we like to say in Buddhist practice that mindfulness is the engine of transformation. It's what powers the development of wisdom. And this template that the Buddha offered of the Four Noble Truths, it's not something esoteric. It's actually quite a practical way of understanding the places that we suffer. It's a little bit like the sort of diagnosis and prognosis and prescription of a doctor. It says, look, you're sick. Here's why you're sick. Good news, you can get better, and here's how.
Yes, agreed.
Right? Those are the 4 steps. And so it's really an invitation for when we are suffering to have a closer look, to, instead of trying to blame someone, blame ourselves, run away from it, avoid it, or wallow in it, to step back, recognize this is okay. This is part of how I learn, part of being human. And then to investigate, to get curious, to say, like, where am I holding on? Where am I resisting? Where am I not understanding? What's actually keeping me hooked in here? And then to begin to experience on a visceral level the process of being in contention with moment-to-moment reality, of actually this quality of contraction, resistance, or control inside that leads to what we call suffering. Is this quality of being burdened by life, of feeling a sense of struggle with what is, not in the sense of the kind of generative struggle for political freedom, but a kind of pointless emotional and psychological struggle internally. And then the beautiful thing that happens is, as we observe it with mindfulness, with perspective and intimacy, feeling it, knowing it, there comes a certain point where the heart of its own accord goes, oh, this is the way it is, and let's go. And in that letting go, we start to understand on a more profound level the causes of suffering and the end of suffering. It's like, oh, I can put this down. I can put this down, which doesn't mean that we give up on what we want. It doesn't mean that we don't care. It doesn't mean that we can't work for change. It means that we're not wasting our energy arguing with the truth of the moment.
Yes, I love that. I love that.
As Byron Katie says, what's the line? She says, when you argue with reality, you lose, but only 100% of the time.
Yes. And I will say that sometimes that's an internal process to come to that. And sometimes it's some people need to talk that out. So it's not all about going internally. I had a very difficult weekend, and I just before our interview recorded a podcast about radical acceptance. My daughter has been put on a medication where I has to watch for this medication reaction of a rash that can then be life-threatening.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. And so I found myself suffering, arguing with reality.
Yeah.
And I did my meditation. I did my yoga. I did my exercise. I talked to a friend. I talked to my husband, and then finally I went to a 12-step meeting and talked it out and went deeper and thought, oh, this is actually about trust. Do I trust her doctor? Do I trust my higher power? Do I trust myself that I'm making the best decision for her as her parent? Because ultimately, the parent can overrule the doctor. ultimately,
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so once I talked that out some, it's like, oh, then I felt a letting go actually of like, all right,
Yeah.
first a responsibility, like, okay,
Yeah.
to not argue with reality, I'm accepting responsibility here.
Yes.
And
Right.
then I do actually trust her
Yeah.
doctor, that he has her
Mm-hmm.
best
Mm-hmm.
intentions in mind, that he's a good doctor, that, the risks outweigh the benefits outweigh the risks, and
Yeah.
that she has eyes on her. She's not living in
Yeah.
isolation, you know. Like,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the process for me was both internal and external, being able to talk that out
Yeah.
and find it. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. I certainly hope that the medication works and,
yes, me too.
that,
But if it doesn't, it's okay.
yeah.
I mean,
Right.
really,
Yeah.
that's what I came to. It's like, well, if that
Right.
actually
Right.
happens, then I mean,
Right. Then we
we
stop
stop
and
it
we readjust and
exactly.
we
And we
take a
get her
different
help,
course.
and then
Right.
we take a different
Exactly.
course. So that's it. Like, that's
Yeah.
all there
Yeah.
really is. But
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
plan part.
Yeah. Yeah. What you're pointing to, I think, is really important, which is that um, self-care,
Mhm.
spirituality, or the way I talk about it in my book, contemplative
Yes.
practice, it's not only an individual and internal
Mhm.
thing, that it is relational, and it is relational with other humans. It's relational with our environment, with
Mhm.
nature, with the planet, and that all of those are resources that we can turn towards. And in the chapter on wisdom, since this is what we were talking about, I talk about the two causes for the arising of kind of wise perspective in Buddhist practice. And one, there's an internal and an external cause. And the internal cause is our own deep and careful
Mhm.
attention. What we've been exploring, this kind of really investigating and looking carefully at things. But the external cause is feedback from wise friends,
Yes.
is actually, right, getting
Yeah.
perspective from others and talking it through, like you said. And so
Support.
one of my aims,
Mhm.
right, right. But my aims in the book is to try to broaden the conversation from contemplative practice, mindfulness being just about meditation and just about something that we do on our own or with our eyes closed, to actually a whole array of tools that we can be creative with. Contemplative practice is, it's kind of like saying, uh, there's many ways to exercise, and running is just one of them. In the same
Mhm.
way, there's all kinds of ways to strengthen our inner life, and meditation is just one of them. So we can use art, we can
Mhm.
use dance, we can storytelling, we can be out in nature, we can, folding the laundry can become a contemplative practice. Having a cup of tea, it's about how we're engaging in the activity,
Yes.
as can spending time with friends or having exploratory conversations and receiving empathy and
Mhm.
support.
Yes.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
really struck me on the chapter on renunciation, which is
Mm.
very clear to me. You said that you need resilience, develop some resilience and
Hmm.
proper support, like line up the support first,
Yeah.
which is which
Right.
is so what people don't do often. They try to go into some
Yeah.
restriction or renunciation, whether it's healthy or unhealthy, and they don't line up the support for doing that. And you're
Yeah.
talking about there's all kinds of ways here, and one really is support, um, and
Hmm.
moving out
Yeah.
into the world
Yeah.
as well, not just staying internal, trying to do that
Right.
alone.
Yeah. I share, as you know from reading it, I share some of my own struggle with this quality of renunciation, which is a kind of intentionally provocative word that I
Mhm.
chose for it, because I'm wanting to sort of invite people to step back and look at our relationship with craving and material comfort in a different way. But I talk about my relationship with
Mhm.
renunciation over the years in quite an open way, in terms of this digestive condition I've had since I was in my 20s, and this kind of yo-yoing back and forth with food. Because one of the things about having this digestive inflammatory condition is there were a lot of foods that I couldn't eat that were the foods I liked, like bread and baked goods and sugar. And So I would, flip back and forth in process that I'm sure many of us are
Mhm.
familiar with, of like this like really rigid abstinence and not having anything, and this kind of clamping down with control, and then the rebellion inside and sort of losing all control and flipping over to the other side and sort of binging on sweets or,
Mhm.
or baked goods, and needing to understand that there's a different way to actually let go of things that doesn't involve willpower, that, as
Mhm.
you're pointing to, requires
Mhm.
support, but also understanding, a sense of like a wise understanding and a sense of empowerment. Like, I'm choosing to do this. And so, one of the synonyms I offer for renunciation in the book is non addiction.
Mhm. Yeah, I did notice that.
What would it be
Mhm.
like? What would it be like to think about our relationship with everything from substances and material comfort to things like work or entertainment, TV, video games, or even things like the inner critic,
Mhm.
or not feeling worthy. We get addicted to these habits of mind, and renunciation is about freeing ourselves from them, not being addicted to putting ourselves down or questioning, doubting ourselves in unhealthy ways, of being able to release that tendency and that capacity to release things. That's the skill we develop of renunciation.
Yes.
And it comes, as we were talking about before, in part from understanding what's in our best interest.
Mhm.
And then it's not a struggle of will, it's actually something we want to do. As one of my first teachers used to say, when you know that fire is hot, you don't touch it
Mhm.
anymore. And so we're really learning about what is for our highest welfare and what isn't. And then the process starts to feed itself. We sort of recognize on deeper levels, yeah, this isn't serving me. How can I put it down? And putting down those unhealthy patterns, whether they're external ones, like engaging in certain activities, or internal ones, like certain habits of rumination, it requires, one, having something else to do, like behavior replacement, right?
Mhm.
It requires being able to change, what I talk about in the book as change the channel.
Yes.
So if we're beating ourselves up and really spinning in some negative rumination, to just be able to recognize, okay, this is not helping. I just need to step out of this and focus on gratitude, on
Mhm.
generosity, on contentment. Anywhere that is not so
Yes.
self-destructive. That's one angle, and then the complementary and supportive process is this investigation, mindfulness, renunciation, is actually engaging with the pattern in a different way and starting to understand it and develop a different relationship with it, so it has less of a hold over us.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was trying to leave a pretty destructive relationship at one point, and my therapist at the time
Mm.
compared it to a food allergy.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Ah,
She
uh-huh.
said, "Eventually, you learn, oh, I can't have this
Hmm.
food, it makes me sick." And so you stop
Right.
eating that food.
Right.
And, and that analogy really just helped me see it in a different way. It's a very similar to what you're saying, like, this is, really
Hmm.
reframing it in terms of what is the best thing for me? What is actually healthy
Yeah.
for me?
Right.
And being able to move towards that, towards health and away from what's
Yeah.
unhealthy for you in a way that
Yeah.
feels,
Yeah.
I don't know, I wouldn't call it easier. But it just feels different. I don't know if I even need to label it.
Yeah. I mean, the word that comes to my mind, Liz, is
Sustainable.
sustainable.
Mhm.
It's like I feel this myself today, particularly with the wars going on around the world and the sort of depth of the refugee crisis or hunger. It's exhausting.
Mhm.
It's so exhausting to be human and care
Yeah.
and be
Mhm.
conscious. And I think that because being alive can take such a toll on our hearts and on our energy, that sometimes when we come to these aspects of our own life, there's just this feeling of just like, I just can't do it. I just don't have the
Mm.
energy. It's
Mhm.
like, and so we're just so fried. So going back to like
Mhm.
support and nourishment, it's this is why the book focuses on the positive
Mhm.
traits and the nourishing qualities of our lives. I'm really looking to help people develop an inner atmosphere of wholeness and health and well-being from which to then turn towards and um, transform the difficult places or the unhealthy patterns. And doing that in a sustainable way means, in many cases, first and foremost, just attending to our
Mhm.
needs and to finding ways to take care of
Well,
ourselves.
absolutely, and I think there's an element of self-knowledge in there too, knowing developing
Mm,
some self-knowledge, like
mhm,
knowing your own energy patterns and
mhm.
knowing when
Yeah,
it feels good to go out into the world and knowing when it's time to retreat some and replenish and
yeah,
re-energize and being
yeah.
able to really be aware of that, moderate that, stand up for yourself around that. Mhm.
Mhm. And having the courage to trust it,
Yes, trust it as well.
right? It's like the self-knowledge piece. I've seen this in myself over the years of my own practice. It's like developing that self-knowledge takes, as you're pointing to, like time,
Mhm.
energy, focus, interest,
Mhm.
right? To really just
Yeah.
even ask, like, well, what do I need? Like, that's radical for many of us to just ask that question. But then sometimes it's like we hear it, we recognize it, we have the self-knowledge, and then there's that next step of, do I have the courage to do it?
Mhm.
Can I really trust what I need and claim that for myself? And that's not
It's
always
not.
easy.
It's not. I think
Yeah.
we're recording this, around the holiday season, in the US. It may air
Mhm.
later, but it comes up during the holidays often for people in terms of having the courage to state what they need, their boundaries. It's really talking about sometimes boundaries, like, "Okay, I've spent time with this family and now I need some alone time or time to go home to my own family," and knowing those energy patterns even on like a micro scale. I my daughter and I volunteer at a cat shelter every week, and
Mm.
we spend about an hour and a half, 2 hours sometimes. There's one day I think she wanted to go later, and I said, that's fine, we can go later, but I want you to know that probably means we're gonna spend an hour instead of an hour and a half or 2 hours. She always likes to push me, "But I'm petting a kitten, I can't stop petting the kitten." Like, I understand the kittens are so cute, but we have to leave,
Yeah.
Like, we have to
Mhm.
we have to oh, I know what it was. We had committed to something else, and so I'm like, "We can go for an hour, but 2
Mhm.
hours is not gonna happen today because we have to be at this other
Right.
place." And so
Yeah.
that's a very small example, but it can take some practice. It can take some self-talk.
Mhm.
It does take some
Mhm.
self-knowledge, takes knowledge of the
Mhm.
other person too, or whoever you're interacting with, to know, all right, this is the time for me to set some boundaries and know,
Yeah.
either I need to
Yeah.
be somewhere else or I need to be home. Whatever that is, that varies for people. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
interactive process for sure, that courage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it comes up all the time with parenting.
Absolutely. I mean, talking about courage, was a huge investigation isn't really the right word. It's more like undertaking. When my wife came to me a couple years ago and said, I think I want to have a
Mhm.
baby, it took a lot of courage to say yes,
Mhm.
to raising a child in such an uncertain world.
Mhm.
It was a beautiful invitation for me to touch into, like, well, what am I about and what do I want? And to, let go of my ideas about the future and what I thought it would look
Mhm.
like, and to really recognize that I want to learn. I'm here to learn. I'm here to
Mm.
grow. I'm here to give. And that the vulnerability of parenting was something that could be, yeah, an adventure and a part of my practice rather than something that gets in the way of it.
Mm.
And
Can you talk
so,
more about that? Like, what do you mean by the vulnerability of parenting?
yeah, well, as you so beautifully illustrated before, and just sharing about your daughter, it's, we care for these beings so deeply and fully, with the recognition that we can't control what happens to them.
Mm-hmm.
It's not up to us. We can't control certainly the external
Mm-hmm.
world, and how it affects them, but even their internal world, they have their own lives and their own trajectory. They're their own people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to love is to open ourselves to loss and to grief. The two are intimately connected, and that is excruciatingly vulnerable.
Yes. Mm.
So, I went into the task of parenting with a real clarity and open eyes on an emotional
Mm-hmm.
level about what it means. Not knowing the experience of
Mm-hmm.
it, because I couldn't, but understanding just from my own practice, this is going to be a different order of opening the heart to love and vulnerability and
Mm-hmm.
loss, and saying, yes, okay, this is part of being human, and I'm here to be fully human and to learn from being human. Yeah. And then the vulnerability of the uncertainty in the world on so many levels today, and the uncertainty of the future, and the impulse to want to, protect our children, to give them every opportunity, and to offer them a life of safety and predictability and stability. And I think that so much of what's challenging and overwhelming in the world today is that those senses of predictability and stability, are disintegrating and slipping away in so many institutions and on so many levels. And so there's a lot of vulnerability in recognizing that, and in took and takes tremendous courage to orient for me towards parenting as, how can I instill in my child the resources and the values to find that stability internally,
Mm-hmm.
and to be a force for change and, support and connection in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of orienting my parenting in that way as an act of service, not just to my own family, but to my community, to say, let's raise a being who has empathy, who has vision, who
Mm-hmm.
has hope, who has
Mm-hmm.
energy, and generosity, and can then, contribute and be part of the solution.
Yes, got it. Thank you. That's a really thoughtful response to that question. Yes. Yeah, we do have all these
Yeah.
hopes and dreams and ideas also before we become parents, and then they shift and change
Yeah.
during our journey. But
Right.
I think you
Right.
highlight underneath that I think most of us as parents do still have those. It's like those base values that we do want to instill and we hope
Yeah.
for, and we try
Right.
to live ourselves as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and as you kind of allude to, the reality of the lack of control and the letting go even of that, right?
Yeah,
We
yeah.
don't know who they
We
will be, or
don't.
the choices they will
We
make. It's
don't.
like,
Yeah.
we just do
Yeah.
the
Or the
best we
world
can,
that they'll live
right?
in. I mean, the world my
Yes,
children grew up in is very different than the one I did. So that's it in itself
absolutely.
is unpredictable, like really unpredictable.
Yeah,
And so it is coming to this sense of centering and adjusting to that, and just trying to
yeah.
do our best, but also that sense of letting go of we can't control everything for sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And trying
Yeah,
not to, move into overwhelm, right? Like back to radical acceptance of, all right, this is the world we're in. And then
Yeah.
how do I move
Yeah.
between it, between inner and
Yeah.
outer, my children, and then
Yeah.
myself,
Right.
and
Yeah.
finding that
Yeah.
balance. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel moved to maybe comment on that phrase that Tara Brach made popular of radical
Hmm.
acceptance, which I talk about in this sort of more classical Buddhist language of
Yes.
equanimity in the book, with this kind of wise perspective and
Hmm.
balance. And it's always important for me because I think it's a subtle concept that can be misunderstood, to differentiate between the kind of radical acceptance of our experience as it's unfolding on a moment to moment level
Hmm.
versus the our non-acceptance of the conditions of the social conditions of our
Yes.
world, right? Being able to recognize, like, no, I'm not accepting that, whatever portion of the world's population lives below the
Hmm.
poverty line or is malnourished from hunger. Like, I accept that that's the truth in the
Yes.
moment, in the sense that I'm coming to terms with it, but I am still like that level of internal radical acceptance is actually provides a solid foundation from which to then respond and to take actions to change
Yes.
the conditions of our world.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
provides choice is how I see it.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. Yeah. Yeah, choice to engage.
Right. Yes. And so then
Yeah.
once we do that, we can move into choice instead of just fighting against it, or, letting the overwhelm take over us. Like, oh, there's nothing to do here. So we
Mhm.
have some choices about how we navigate it, is how I see it. So
Mm,
we are coming to
mm.
the end of our discussion here. Any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with? And then also, please let them know how to find you and find the book.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I think maybe just in parting, just this one of the core messages of the book is that every day of our life, we are practicing something. We're making choices in how we live, and that those choices shape both our inner life and our world. And so, with some attention and some practice, we can actually shape our world inside and out. The future's not written. And we can use our experiences every day to grow more balanced, more wise, more compassionate, and stronger. Yeah, I hope that folks listening feel empowered and feel a sense of possibility in themselves. And if you want to learn more about my work, my website is orenjsofer.com, and the book Your Heart Was Made for This should be available in bookstores everywhere.
Thank you so much, Oren, for your wisdom and your time here sharing that with us.
Thanks, Liz.
I hope you truly enjoyed today's episode. Remember that you can get free hypnosis downloads over at my website, drlizhypnosis.com, DRLIZ hypnosis.com. I work all over the world doing hypnosis. So if you're interested in working with me, please schedule a free consultation over at my website, and we'll see what your goals are and if I can be of service to you in helping you reach them. Finally, if you liked today's episode, please subscribe to the podcast or tell a friend. That way, more and more people learn about the power of hypnosis. All right, everyone, have a wonderful week. Peace. This podcast is not mental health treatment, nor should it replace mental health treatment. If you need therapy or hypnotherapy, please seek treatment from a trained professional.